Hi there. Welcome to the Isogo TV podcast from isogostrong.com. I'm your host, Becky Hammond, and you and I gather here on this podcast to fixate on strength in our families and on our teams. Because when we start from assuming strength, we can make relationships easier. And this is episode 124. This is the fourth podcast in a leadership series that's running for this month of July 2020, about lockdown leadership and the 5 themes that have shown through from the best of the best leaders. You know, in the midst of world uncertainty, the best leaders are still thriving. So how in the world are they doing it? That's what this series is about. Marie Guest is a world-renowned leadership coach and consultant, and in this episode, we get to chat about something that he is not only excited about, but has seen of the best leaders in the world. We are talking about clarity. So far in this series, we've delved into stories and strategies from the best leaders who are right now practicing grace and kindness. They're prioritizing individualization and flexibility, and they're choosing to communicate well. Today, as we get into this clarity in time of uncertainty, as a leader, you will see just how much influence you get to have and how much hope and peace you get to bring to your team just by providing even boring levels of clarity. So let's clear up that murky water with leadership clarity.
Well, good morning, Marie Guest. I was going to say just your first name, but I decided to say both. So good morning. I'm so excited that we're having this conversation today.
Well, good afternoon to you. And, you know, we are talking about clarity in this conversation, and you're bringing some clarity right into it from the start around, you know, surnames and time of the day. How have you been?
Doing good. You know, I mean, it's a crazy time still. Like, I didn't think that if we were in July, we would still be saying that. And we are. We're saying that there is still a lot of uncertainty. And I know even in my personal life, we've had just kind of some close calls and just some things where we felt like, wow, one moment could change a lot of things. And I think that kind of all speaks into what we're talking about today and why this topic, this theme of clarity, has come up as one of the key elements of leaders who are doing it well, are really doing well in this season of lockdown, of uncertainty. You know, I mean, a lot of organizations are not in their same, you know, we're all staying at home and we're all working from home, but there's been a lot of changes, and it continues to be uncertain in this time. And so this theme of clarity has been one that the leaders who are doing it well are just they are starting to have a clear voice and a clear perspective, and they are communicating that to their team. So, Marie, this is a topic that you is near and dear to your heart, and that you have seen leaders all around you do well. You've also been able to encourage others that aren't seeing the importance of it to say, okay, well, what happens if you practice clarity, practice communicating more clearly, and painting pictures of expectations. So let's dive into this topic a little bit more. Why don't you first, if you would, just define clarity for us? What do you mean when you say that the best leaders are those who can create clarity for their team?
So totally agree with everything you just said then, Becky, around this time right now in July 2020 and what it's like. And, you know, things changing so rapidly. And who would have thought that after what we've been through in the last few months, we'd be still in this situation right now. Before I share my perspectives, I just hope everyone that's listening to us are happy, healthy and well, because it is something on the minds of every conversation I'm having with people and of leaders. And I think it links back to some of our early conversations about that care for our team as well. I think about, you know, when you see on Instagram those beautiful pictures of nature, of this still water, and you see the pebbles underneath the water, or you might see the reflection, or you see these beautiful shots where it shows underneath the water and then above the water. And it's just, and look at that, and you feel calm, you feel peace, and you think, wow, I just would love to be there. I'd love to swim in there. I'd love to just, you know, experience that. It's not the photos on Instagram of a murky dam where you go, wow,
that's
on Mars
amazing.
science, that's amazing. Hey, I can't wait to put my foot in that one. And I follow Nature, which is just a very simple account on Instagram, but shares those type of photos all the time. And honestly, I look at those and I think that's just beautiful, and it brings this calmness to my sense of being when I look at those, and I love it. The murkiness, the lack of clarity. Imagine going for a walk. If we were walking in the forest and it's a hot day and we're with our children and there's a lake and we say, let's go for a swim, and we walk up to the lake and it's crystal clear. We go, okay, we can see the hazards. We can see maybe there's a log that's washed down. We can see how deep it is, if there's any weeds or anything like that. And we say, yep, go for a swim. If it's all murky, kids, let's just back up and, play on the sand. Let's not on the pebbles. We won't go in the water. So clarity in nature gives us this calmness, this beauty. We understand what's in front of us.
Sense of security in some ways, right? Yeah.
Yeah. A sense of knowing, what's ahead. Yeah. And as leaders, we need to provide that clarity. We need to lead clarity and those clearing conversations. And this time right now, and as we're talking about lessons in leadership in lockdown, unfortunately, we've just got all these bits that are adding to the murkiness that we need to bring to the surface and bring that clarity.
Kind of filter out the things that are creating the murkiness, that are creating the lack of clarity.
Yeah, 100%. And we were talking before this conversation about assumptions and about just going through in our leadership roles or in our life about we're just assuming this or just assuming that, or maybe people understand it, or, I've told them once, they get it. But having those conversations, when we bring clarity to the conversation, just think for a moment about how that feels, and not just the calmness, but it reduces the anxiety, reduces the stress. It gives us a clear direction moving forward. It aligns with what's my purpose, what are my priorities, and also where can I provide value right now? And people need that, because right now we've got all these other bits around us that we don't know what's happening. There's change from organizations, from policies, from communities to governments, and all that's happening.
Yeah.
So I need clarity. I need clarity right now so I can feel at my best and I can deliver on what I need to do.
Yeah. Well, what a powerful position if, as a leader, you could actually impact your team's psyche in a really uncertain time by just creating clarity, even in one space, right? Like, we're still going to have lack of clarity or those murky waters in some of our other areas. But what if in one space as a leader, you could create a sense of for them in one very important part of their life where they actually spend, most of their time if you're working full time. Yeah.
And I think about some of the work I've done over the years in partnering with organizations that work in high risk areas. So for example, power generation, where, and when I talk about power, I'm talking about electricity. And what I've heard and what I've found out in talking to leaders in those emergency situations where we've got to be really switched on, what happens is people talk more, they communicate more frequently, they reduce the assumptions, the murkiness, more, they're communicating frequently and clearly. And what happens is productivity, safety, performance improves in those situations when things are at their most dangerous, their normal day-to-day work.
Wow.
Because they're bringing that clarity in day to day. And this has been repeated many, many times. The challenge for them is, how do we take that mindset and that driving and leading of clarity into our normal business as usual?
Right. When there's not a sense of urgency or emergency, at which maybe even happened at the beginning of kind of lockdown time, right? Like, people were like having more regular conversations and things like that because it felt like there was a lot of adrenaline up. But then what happens once the adrenaline wears off and now you are kind of still in an uncertain environment, but you're back to your day-to-day. And as leader, where can we find that oomph and that drive to create clarity? So what have you seen? What stories can you tell us about, the leaders that you have seen that really have done this well, or, the impact that it has had either way, when they've done it well or when they haven't done it well?
So over the past few months, I've been talking to lots of leaders, and thankfully there's some really good examples where leaders have done this really well. And I think it's not just about the team that you lead, but it could be those people you work with side by side, your peers, but also leading clarity upwards sometimes as well. Quick example around a leader that I know. He needed to really get clear with his team about what are the priorities right now. And you might think, is that such a big thing? Well, what's happening with this team and with a lot of teams right now is people are working from home. Some are working back in the office. There's a transition going on right now, like some in different areas right now. And the workload isn't just the same. In some areas, it's increasing because they've got projects and they've got business as usual type tasks to do as well. And people are starting to feel overwhelmed. They're starting to feel like, well, how do I deliver this? How do I still actually maybe do a bit of homeschooling, pick my kids up? I'm in the office some days, and for the most, I'm at home. And it was the team going to that leader and saying, hang on, I actually don't know what's the biggest priority right now. And then the conversation generated and evolved into, you know what, that chunk of work, that project, let's leave that for a few months. And they were like, really? I didn't even know we could do that.
Wow.
And that was that, let's leave that. But this right here, this other project we need to deliver on, that needs to be done right now, and the tasks for that need to be done right now. But leave this other bit, leave this other bit. And I think what the best leaders are doing is actually just bringing the unknown to the surface. They're actually making it very overt. They're having that conversation more frequently to make sure, hey, I'm not telling you how to do your job, but what I'm going to do is make sure you're clear on what our priorities are.
Don't you think that sometimes leaders think that this is kind of like a boring conversation to have? Like they might say, well, I mean, like you talked about assumptions, but even more than assumptions, just like, well, I mean, like that just, it's not that interesting, right? Like I was talking to a leader today who said that she had a meeting with her team, and they've been hit very hard by the impact of COVID-19, and they've had to do layoffs and they've had to restructure. And she decided to have a meeting with everybody on her team. There's like 40 people there. And she went, there was, I think, 4 or 5 different departments, and everybody was on a Zoom live, and she went through 4 or 5 different org charts. And she explained who was in what role and what they were going to be doing. And as she got off, she was just like, oh my goodness, poke my eyes out. I'm sure everyone was so bored, like this is not a riveting conversation. But what she found was that people were text messaging her, Facebook messaging her, emailing her, saying that was the best meeting that we could have ever had in this moment. Thank you so much for going through that. And what they were saying was, thank you for providing clarity where we were feeling stressed. When people are getting laid off, of course you're stressed. It's unclear then, not only, man, am I keeping my job, but what are other people doing? Who do I go to now to work on this project, or who am I supposed to collaborate with on this? And what she did by having what she thought was a boring meeting, she made a peace in her team that she probably couldn't have achieved in any other way except for going through a boring org chart.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example where through that process, I can imagine the flow of the conversation of, hey, I just want to confirm this bit of information, and I just want to check on what's that person's role now. And now I understand this. So it's, again, getting everyone on the same page, removing the assumptions. Yes. This is the org chart going forward right now, and this is how we are going to work together. I mean, that is showing, I think, the vehicle that the discussion on the org chart helps create greater clarity, not just on the org chart, but I'm sure other things would have fallen out from that as well.
Yeah, definitely following up a Q&A, and people feel, because the leader is being forthright, they feel more secure that they can ask questions because they have a construct for asking them now. It's not just kind of out of left field, and you know that the leader has given the impression that she is open for their questions and for their concerns and cares about their everyday job.
This leads me to a point, Becky, I think is really important too, for us to consider that sometimes we need to provide clarity about where we can't provide clarity. And in that conversation, in that conversation, this may have come up. I'm not, of course, not too sure, but what this looks like sometimes is people thinking, oh, we won't talk about that because we don't know. But what happens is everyone else is creating their own story, their own meaning, what they think is going on right now.
Yeah.
And as a leader, you might need to say, and what I would encourage people to say is, right now, all we know is this.
Right.
And that's all we do know. And this other part, about an org chart or a change or what's happening from project in the future, whatever it might be, we don't know what's happening there.
Yeah.
But, and so therefore can't provide any more clarity, but I can provide you clarity on this. Again, reduces that stress and the assumptions and the stories and potentially gossip as well.
Yeah. When you and I talked back a while ago for my strengths and crisis,
feels like years ago.
It feels like years ago. It might have only been a few months ago. You mentioned a leader who you had worked with who said that communicated this idea of creating clarity even when it wasn't going to be popular, even when the decisions that were being made weren't going to be the fuzzy give it the fuzzy feeling. Can you share that story again about what she said?
Yeah, I've got a few stories. I think it was this one.
I'll let you know. I'll let you know if it sounds familiar.
Well, one that this does remind me of many, many years ago when I was working for an organization and redundancies were happening. Yeah. And I remember talking to the CEO, and we're walking to one of those town hall meetings where all the staff were going to be there. And I remember I just happened to be walking next to the CEO, and I said, and I was quite young and junior in that day. And I said something like, are you going to talk about redundancies? People are really worried, and maybe are they going to be talked about? Something like that. And she paused, walking. Again, great leadership. Didn't just keep walking. Paused, looked at me, and she said, Murray, of course I am. People want to know what's going on. I'm going to talk about it and answer their questions as best I can right now.
Well, yeah. And that's a scary thing to do sometimes.
Yeah. And I've seen the opposite to that happen. Redundancies obviously are an emotional process for a lot of people.
Of course.
For lots of reasons. But when you can provide that clarity, again, it makes it easier. It links back to us talking about leading with grace and kindness, and how important that is. The other story that I want to share also is about leading clarity upwards as well. And a leader I was talking to earlier this week, she shared some frustrations about how I am being communicated from my leader one-on-one. I feel like I'm not getting the full picture. Whereas my peer who is having one-on-ones and another peer having one-on-ones, we all feel a bit misaligned in our approach and how we're leading our teams. And they said, look, what do we do about this? And so they actually went to their manager collectively and said, hang on, we don't think this process is working. We feel like we're missing some gaps and that there's a lack of alignment and clarity. Can we change this process and meet collectively more often to reduce that? And they were actually a little bit concerned because they didn't know how this manager would respond. And he was very much like, yeah, sure. Okay, let's do this. How does it work? I'm glad you came to me. Again, some assumptions there, but so powerful because I've spoken to them again since, and they've said it's been so good. It's just helped us get clear for not just us, but for when we are leading our teams as well.
Wow. I love that. I love that as a leader, you can seek the clarity. Like, so when you start to see things are murky, you don't just have to sit there and trudge through the murky water. You can also start to pursue ways of cleaning that up. And I mean, it could feel a little risky, like you said. Like they said, I don't know how he's going to take this, but in the end, hopefully you're approaching a leader who says, wow, if we can create more clarity, then in the end, it's going to be better for all of us. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, sometimes when we do jump in that clear water, we can stir it up a little bit.
True.
And it can get a little murky. And sometimes to create clarity, it's going to get a little bit, I don't know, I'm going back to the metaphor here.
Yeah.
A little bit uncomfortable, a little bit
wet,
murky.
Your shoes are going to get wet.
Yeah, maybe a little cold,
Yeah.
A little bit uncomfortable. That's what it's about. But through that, you're going to get the clarity that you need for you, your team, and it's just so needed right now, Becky.
Yeah. So what does it look like? So you talked about some really great stories. What are some of like the actions and behaviors? So as a leader, I'm listening right now. I'm like, okay, those are some good stories, but like, how do I actually go about doing that? Like, what are some actual behaviors that you are observing that are repeatable by other people who might be listening today?
So I think about from this conversation with clarity, there's a couple of angles that a leader can go down. One is their own self-clarity, where they need that. And to take the time out to reflect and think, what is causing me stress right now? Where am I lacking clarity? And write it down. Write down the list. Actually do the work and say, okay, now who do I need to talk to increase that clarity for each one of these things? And then plan and actually have that conversation and explain your intent. I need to know clarity on this project. I need to know clarity around what's happening. But actually then make sure you have the conversations. So that reduces your own sense of stress and worry, and helps you get focused. And then the second thing is to actually have that conversation with your team. I invite all leaders to be thinking about not even thinking. Let's take that back, Becky. I invite all leaders at their next meeting to actually say to the team, where do you need more clarity right now? What do you need clarity on?
So inviting them to help you point out the murky parts.
Yeah, point out the murky parts, and then make sure you listen, and then create space to have that conversation. And you may not have all the answers, and that's okay. That's 100% okay. But create the space to have the conversation, and then generate some actions where you need to follow up and get the answers, or give them the understanding that you don't have the answer right now, to reduce that. For some teams, you might need to give them some time to reflect on that and then come back to that. And others that actually might generate, which I think happens quite a lot, is the clarity that team members are going to provide to each other. So it's not all about you as the leader saying, hey, I need to tell you this, this, and this, but it's actually going to increase the understanding between team members as well. The third one, I think that is really important, is actually talk to your team about how often you are talking in your meetings. Is the cycle of your meetings matching the rhythm of your work?
What does that mean?
So I think if we think about how our work flows in our teams, sometimes we are getting through work at a pace where we need to talk more frequently to match the information flow that's coming in and the decisions we need to make.
Okay.
So, for example, a team might be meeting once a month or something like that, yet they need to have updates more frequently and get that alignment throughout the month. So another great example of this in the recent months, a leader I know was meeting with his team once a week. And it was a pretty good meeting. But with working from home and all of the changes to the arrangements, they now have that huddle meeting every morning on Zoom where they check in, what are our priorities, how are we going, what's working. And the team are definitely saying, we want this to continue when we go back into the office, because it's happening every day, and how valuable it is in bringing that clarity. I think we talked about this one in communication when we spoke about that, because it is such an important thing right now in having those conversations more frequently to match the needs and the rhythm of the work of the team.
What if a leader is feeling like, man, I just don't have time. I don't have time for like more meetings. So what have the best been doing that have helped them with that? Because it's not that the best leaders aren't busy. They are. Everyone's busy, right?
Well, I'd ask the question of leaders that say that, what's the most valuable thing that you should be doing with your time? And what's the time cost to have the conversation now? And what's that impact if you don't have it now, and how are you actually repeating a conversation multiple times down the track?
Right.
A leader I was talking to yesterday, she said to me, Murray, I actually went back to my team after our last session where we talked about clarity. So it's awesome when leaders do the work.
Yes.
And
amazing.
She said, I was thinking about this conversation, and she said, I realized when I was delegating, I would normally just tell them, hey, can you do this bit of work, and leave it. And she said, I paused and I actually said, I need it by this date. I need to look like this, and this is the priority. And she said, I was really clear. She said, it only took me an extra couple of minutes. And she said, I even felt a bit uncomfortable, but the person was like, thank you so much. And she said, previously there would have been 5 or 6, backwards and forwards trying to sort the work out. So to answer your question, Becky, I think it's the role of the leader to actually bring that clarity and have those conversations sooner, because when you let that go, when you let it fester, when you let the water go murky, you'll pay the price down the track.
Yeah. So it's like incremental meetings are going to, in the end, be more efficient than one grand meeting, or of going down the wrong path because it was fogged over, right? To mix our metaphors a little bit. But so that nothing's a surprise, right? Especially in performance, in evaluation, right? Like, I mean, these are some of the basics of managing, of like, well, if you don't tell them what you're expecting, then there is no way, like, then it's not fair to hold them accountable to something that they didn't know was the bar. And so in some ways you can't afford not to, even though it feels like maybe because you're busy. I mean, it feels stressful, right?
I think it's a great link to It's the Manager, which is the Gallup book that Jim Harter and Jim Collison released last year. And there's Jim Clifton. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
That's okay.
That's okay.
Jim Collison would probably appreciate that shout out.
He'll appreciate that. Hey, that's okay. Too many Jims.
Lots of Jims.
Thank you, Becky. Thank you. Clarity there. But we talk about past work and future work, and past work was an annual review, and future work is an ongoing conversation. That's what we're talking about here. It's not, hey, how are you going once a year? It's an ongoing conversation about what's working and what's not, and how can you acknowledge the good and improve in some areas. And again, that's that mindset of the ongoing conversation as a leader to provide that clarity in other areas as well.
Yeah. So what's the impact? I mean, we've been talking about it kind of incrementally as we've gone along here. What have you found that the leaders who are creating the most clarity in their teams, what is happening to their team? Why should leaders be like, oh yeah, I want to create clarity?
Honestly, they are happier. They are thriving. They are more productive. They feel less stress. And I think there's less resentment, because I think sometimes we can get some of those negative emotions of, I'm not hearing and I'm creating a story why I don't know and why it's murky. And I wish my leader would tell me, but I'm too busy to find, and all of that stuff. So all that's going.
Yeah.
So we've got more happiness, more engagement, more productivity, and less stress.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. As an institution, my experience says that we do not take into account the emotional stress and the impact that that has as much as we could or should. That it's like as if you're carrying an extra weight on your back. You know, you're a marathoner, and every day you're starting at 0 and you're trying to get to the end. And that emotional stress of not having clarity is like carrying an extra weight, so that as you go, you're not going to be as productive. You're not going to be as happy doing it because you have an extra weight on your back. You're going to be thinking about things that, you know, maybe you shouldn't spend your time spinning your wheels about. But when you can, as a leader, release that from them, it's like you're taking a burden off their back, and they can feel lighter and more, you know, like you said, happier and less distracted by the emotional weight of a stress of the lack of clarity.
Yeah, I think to add to that, there's less conscious attention, there's less thinking, there's less worry about, I'm thinking about all these elements right now. I can actually focus on what I need to do right now.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about other analogies right now that are just so relevant to this conversation. You think about when you go on a holiday and you plan it. Where are we going? What does it look like? Where are we staying? And some people might prefer to just go, I'm heading out, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Generally, though, I would say everyone's got some level of plan, as big or small as it is. And when we have that structure and that clarity that's going to help us get there, I think even with the people that like the smallest amount of planning, that enables them to know where I've got some clarity and where I can, you know, go with the flow. It's when we just don't know at all. Again, anxious. What am I doing? What does it look like? I have no idea. I was in America years ago, and you and I talk about driving in America. It's hard enough driving on the other side of the car. Let me tell you that.
I have had that experience. Yes.
Yes. But then so there's one bit of clarity. How do I drive on the other side of the car? And then to actually, you know, drive across, is it the I-45, whatever it is, which is.
You've been to Omaha too many times.
I'm trying to think you know, so many big roads. But then to actually say, I drove from Los Angeles out to Las Vegas, and to get out of LA, and where am I going? I needed to know, where am I going? Which corner do I take? Which street sign? How do I do that? Because I remember that knot in my stomach with a car full of family and luggage, and trying to get across 5 lanes of traffic. Like,
right.
Where am I going? How am I going to get there? So I can make the best, safest decisions to reduce that stress. It's exactly what we're talking about right now. As leaders, we need to provide that. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. That's a really tangible metaphor that we can kind of think about where are we going and how are we going to get there? And so we don't have to be stressed when we're driving. We can just chat with our family instead of feeling stressed and overwhelmed. So what if there are leaders listening right now that are like, okay, I'll try it, right? Or, oh, I see how I could add a little bit more clarity, or let's just see what the impact would be. What do you think what do you suggest that leaders would do right now, that they can say, okay, this is a tangible thing that I'm going to do next week or this week with my team?
Yeah, so I think the first thing would be to have that conversation with the team, to actually say, right, we've got our standard team meeting, but let's bring to the topic at the start of the meeting this concept of clarity. And you can even use the traffic light analogy. So right now, where have we got green lights that we can just go straight ahead? Where do you feel like you've got some amber lights where you don't quite understand? You know, I need a bit of information. Right now, I would
call that a yellow light.
Okay, yellow. So let's call that an amber light. And then we have our red lights. Where have I got red lights right now where I actually don't understand? I need clarity.
Okay.
Really simple. And then just go through that with the team. Again, bringing out the clarity, bringing that out. And some of that you'll find will be, as I said earlier, from the leader within the team, or maybe from customers, internal customers, internal suppliers, where then it's going to drive some real tangible steps to say, okay, I'm going to go find that out. I'm going to find out what we need to know, so that we can
and not be afraid to say, I don't know. Let's think about that.
Yeah, let's loop back on that. Let's come back in our next meeting to, don't need to solve everything in that first discussion.
Yeah.
Let's go and find out, and we'll come back. Yeah. Cool. So that's what I say people should do first. And I think, of course, team meetings are a great place to do that. But again, like we said earlier, think about what it means for you one-on-one, for your own, manager that you report to or leader that you report to, and how you can get more clarity for yourself as well.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say, Becky, is try it out at home.
That seems like a whole nother ball game.
So if it's something which, I put my hand up as a husband and father where I've missed the clarity bus, let's just say, and haven't provided that. And the stressful conversations I've had. So what I would say is, have the conversation at home. If you have a partner, and about where are we missing that right now?
Yeah.
And how can we improve that clarity? And just see how that can reduce maybe some of that stress and improve that well-being.
Yeah. And kind of circling all back around the uncertainty. If we can create certainty in some of the most important areas of our lives, then even though we still live in the midst of uncertainty, we're going to have less stress and experience more well-being in some of those key areas in our lives. So cool. Love that last little tip. I think you were trying to coach me on that one. So I will take that one. I'll take that one home. Conversations like we've been having today are ones that we also have in our Leaders Who Give a Damn program. What's the connection? What do you think the connection to the Leaders Who Give a Damn program and clarity really is?
So definitely, I would say knowing your people is one of our modules that we talk about. Leaders Who Give a Damn, around knowing their needs and knowing them. Definitely also prioritizing conversations. That's a key part that we talk about in the Leaders Who Give a Damn program. And as you said earlier, Becky, not just waiting to have the conversation, but let's talk about that reduction of anxiousness or murkiness and bring the clarity there. And even the last one, tackling busyness. You mentioned, hey, leaders are busy, leaders have got a lot on their plate, but I would say this is a key part in our leadership roles and making this a priority, and it will then give you that reduction in your busyness, because I think I'd like to say a lot of leaders will find it'll prevent some of that recommunication and rework and going over things that's happening right now.
Yeah. Yes, I love it. That is totally true. And we, in the program, in addition to tips and stories, provide some clear action that leaders can take. The idea is that we want this to be useful to you, very consumable. And so if leadership is something that you care about, if you care about caring for your people, then definitely check out Leaders Who Give a Damn. We have one more podcast in this series about lockdown leadership. So next week we are going to be talking about self-care, well-being, and just understanding the importance of taking care of yourself and the impact that it is having on some of the best leaders that we have the pleasure and honor to work with during this time. So thank you, Marie, for sharing your insight on clarity and your stories. And it's just been a pleasure to chat as always.
Right back at you, Becky. Always a pleasure chatting with you, and thank you for sharing your insights and stories from across the pond.
Murky or clear? I think
clear pond.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. See you next week.
All right. See you now. Bye.
There were a lot of metaphors and word pictures in that conversation today. I'm sure one of those is one that you can use to paint a picture in your mind about not only the importance of clarity, but also of the way that you will choose to get there. I hope that you follow along with this series here on the podcast as we get into the final theme next week that has shone through, how do you say that? From the best leaders during lockdown. And if we're not already connected, Murray and I would both love to connect with you on Instagram or LinkedIn, where we can continue this conversation around strengths in leaderships and families. On Instagram, you can find me at IsogoStrong, and you can find Murray at Murray Guest. On LinkedIn, you can find us each by our first and last name. So I hope that you do that. Before we sign off, I also want to make sure that you know about this huge crisis discount that we've been offering for the Leaders Who Give a Damn program. During this podcast, we chatted about the program a little bit. And if you really want to be a leader who inspires others to follow you, even in crisis, then you can find all the details and sign up over at leaderswhogiveadamn.com. Use the code 50PROMO for 50% off through this crazy tough season that continues to persist in so many ways. That code is the numbers 50 and the word promo for 50% off the Leaders Who Give a Damn program. We, Murray and I both, would be honored to have you join us. You and your strengths have the power to make a ripple effect in your family and on your team, and then ultimately across the entire world. We can feel that now more than ever. The world needs your strengths. So learn them, love them, and live them in your own circles of influence. Until next time on Isogo TV.